What if your thoughts weren't really yours? What if your behavior, your choices, your relationships were being shaped by a force you couldn't see? What if the true driver of your life was hidden beneath consciousness, operating in the shadows? This was the radical proposition of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, and the first to suggest that we are not the masters of our own minds. Born in 1856 in Freiburg, now part of the Czech Republic, Freud would go on to redefine the 20th century's understanding of human nature. He was a neurologist by training, a scientist, but also a revolutionary. And what he discovered wasn't just brain chemistry. It was something darker, deeper, more primal, the unconscious. Freud introduced a terrifying idea that we are not driven primarily by reason or logic, but by buried urges, desires we don't admit, even to ourselves. To him, the mind wasn't a mirror. It wasn't clean, rational, or simple. It was a house with locked doors, rooms filled with repressed memories, forbidden fantasies, and unspoken fears. And yet, this house was still ours. Freud saw civilization as a compromise, a thin layer of order stretched over chaos. Rules, morality, culture, all there to suppress the wildness within. And that wildness is what he dedicated his life to studying. He believed the civilized self, the one you present to the world, is only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies a massive, hidden world, one that influences how you act, how you love, how you dream. This world isn't evil. It isn't good. It's simply honest, brutally honest. And for Freud, truth was never found in politeness. It was found in the things you weren't supposed to say, but discovering the unconscious wasn't enough. If this hidden world existed, Freud wanted to understand how it operated. He began to map the psyche not as a monolith, but as a system, layered, conflicted, and dynamic. He realized that the mind wasn't just a dark vault of instincts. It was a stage for an ongoing internal drama. Freud believed that our lives were shaped not by one singular self, but by competing forces inside us, each with its own voice, its own agenda, and its own sense of power. What emerged was one of Freud's most influential contributions to psychology, a three-part model of the mind: the id, the ego, and the superego. This wasn't just theory, it was a language, a way to describe the tug-of-war we all feel, between what we want, what we believe, and what the world expects of us. And it's here that the full picture of Freud's vision comes into focus. Freud didn't just uncover the unconscious, he gave it architecture. He believed the mind was built like a layered city, chaotic in its origins, structured only in appearance. He introduced three core components of the psyche: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is your primal engine. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't think. It just wants. Sex, food, power, survival, pleasure. The id screams like a child, irrational and relentless. The superego, by contrast, is your internal judge, forged by parents, religion, and culture. It's the voice of guilt, of shame, of you shouldn't. It keeps you socially acceptable, but it also weighs you down. Caught between the id and the superego is the ego, the mediator. It tries to keep both sides from tearing you apart. It lies, compromises, represses, strategizes, all in the name of functioning in the real world. Freud believed that this triad is always in conflict, and that much of our suffering comes from trying to navigate that battlefield without even knowing it's there. Our traumas, our urges, our defenses, they don't simply vanish. We suppress them. We bury them beneath logic and politeness, but they surface anyway. Through dreams, Freud argued, the unconscious speaks, not directly, but through symbols, through distortion, through metaphor. You're not dreaming randomly. You're remembering something that's been edited, censored, masked. Dreams are the diary of the unconscious, written in a language your ego doesn't fully understand. Freud called dreams the royal road to the unconscious, and he believed that interpreting them was one of the few ways we could understand what's really going on inside ourselves. This gave birth to psychoanalysis, not just a therapy, but a philosophical exploration, a conversation with the parts of yourself you're trained to ignore. But for Freud, dreams were just the beginning. He wanted to understand where these internal conflicts came from, and more importantly, when they began. He looked back, not just into the unconscious, but into childhood, into the raw, unfiltered emotional world we all begin with, before language, before restraint, before masks. Freud believed that our earliest experiences weren't just memories. They were foundations, emotional blueprints etched into the unconscious before we even knew we were building them. He noticed that people carried patterns, recurring emotional loops that seemed to echo relationships from the past. And the more he listened, the more he saw a pattern, that many of our adult struggles weren't born in adulthood at all. They were shaped in silence, in childhood rooms, in unspoken dynamics and unmet needs. And this is where Freud's theories would go from bold to controversial. But Freud didn't stop with dreams. He ventured deeper into childhood, sexuality, and taboo. He believed that the roots of adult neuroses could be traced to early developmental stages, to how we processed love, authority, and even conflict before we had the words to describe them. The most controversial of these theories was the Oedipus complex, the idea that young boys feel unconscious desire for their mothers and rivalry toward their fathers. It wasn't meant literally in every case, but symbolically, as a way to explain how deep emotional bonds and identity are formed. Freud argued that our personality isn't built from rational choices, but from how we resolve or repress early emotional experiences. The stronger the repression, the more powerful the return. Unresolved desire doesn't die. It transforms into obsession, into phobia, into misplaced guilt or compulsive behavior. He believed that symptoms, anxiety, depression, even addiction, were not diseases in themselves, but messages from the unconscious. Freud gave us language for that pain. He gave us tools to explore it. And perhaps most importantly, he gave us permission to look inward, to see ourselves not as clean slates or logical machines, but as living contradictions. Even if some of his theories haven't aged well, the framework he introduced continues to shape how we think about therapy, childhood, identity, and trauma. We still speak of Freudian slips, of unconscious motives, of defense mechanisms, ideas so embedded in culture, we forget where they came from. Freud showed us that to know ourselves, we must confront what we've buried. He didn't just give us a diagnosis, he handed us a mirror and asked us to look beyond the reflection. If this video gave you something to reflect on, help the channel grow by tapping like, and consider subscribing for more explorations of the mind, meaning, and human nature. And if something resonated with you, share it in the comments. Let's grow this conversation together.